Welcome back to the show, everyone. I'm sitting here with my good friend, and today we are diving into something I've been struggling with all week. Honestly, I've been feeling so uninspired lately. You know those mornings where the alarm goes off and it feels like the bed has a literal magnetic pole?
I know that feeling all too well. It's like a physical weight pressing you down into the mattress. You lie there staring at the ceiling, negotiating with yourself. If I skip the shower, I can sleep for 10 more minutes. If I skip breakfast, I can sleep for 20.
Exactly. And that's where the motivation versus consistency battle begins before my feet even touch the floor. I find myself waiting for a spark, some sudden surge of energy or a brilliant idea to give me a reason to jump up and start my projects. But lately, that spark is nowhere to be found.
I hear you. It's that classic slump. We've been conditioned by movies and social media to think that successful people wake up every day at 5 a.m. with a smile on their face, ready to conquer the world. But in reality, the spark is a very unreliable friend. It shows up when it wants to, usually at 11 p.m. when you're trying to go to sleep, and vanishes right when you actually need to be productive.
That is so true. My best ideas always come when I'm brushing my teeth or about to drift off, never when I'm sitting at my laptop staring at a blank document. I'm starting to think my reliance on motivation is actually my biggest weakness. I'm essentially a slave to my mood. If I feel good, I work. If I feel meh, I scroll through my phone for 3 hours.
That's a profound realization. Most people treat motivation like a reliable fuel source, like gasoline for a car. But in reality, it's more like a flickering candle. It's beautiful and warm when it's lit, but the slightest breeze of a bad mood, a rainy day, or a long workday can blow it out instantly. If your car only ran on candlelight, you'd never leave the driveway.
That's a hilarious image, but it's accurate. I've been waiting for the right vibe. I tell myself, I'll go to the gym once I find the perfect playlist, or I'll start that English essay once I've cleaned my entire apartment. It's a form of procrastination disguised as preparation.
We call that productive procrastination. You're doing things that feel useful, but they aren't the actual task. You're waiting for the emotion of readiness. But here's the secret. Readiness is a myth. You don't feel ready to do hard things. You do hard things, and then you feel ready to keep going.
So if motivation is the flickering candle, what's the industrial-grade floodlight? Is it consistency?
Precisely. Consistency is the discipline of showing up regardless of your emotional state. It's the boring secret to success that no one wants to talk about because it doesn't feel as exciting as a sudden burst of inspiration. It's the difference between an amateur and a professional. An amateur works when they feel like it. A professional works because it's 9 a.m.
I think the word discipline scares people. It sounds like a punishment. It reminds me of being back in school. But when you put it that way, separating your work from your feelings, it actually sounds quite liberating. It means I don't have to feel like a genius to act like one.
Exactly. It takes the pressure off. You don't have to be on all the time. You just have to be there. If you show up to your desk and write one terrible paragraph, you've still won the day because you maintained the habit. The quality can vary, but the presence must be constant.
I love that. The quality can vary, but the presence must be constant. I think I've been judging my morning self too harshly. If I'm not 100% enthusiastic, I feel like I'm failing. But maybe the win is just getting the coffee brewing and opening the laptop.
That's the first victory. If you can win the first 15 minutes of your day by following a routine rather than a feeling, the rest of the day usually falls into place. But let's look at why it's so hard to keep that up for more than a few days.
Let's break this down for our listeners. I think we use these words so often that they've become buzzwords, words that sound important but have lost their specific meaning. How would you define the difference between the two in a way that's easy to grasp for someone trying to master English?
That's a fair point. Language is often the key to understanding behavior. If you look at the root of the word motivation, it comes from the Latin movere, which means to move. It's a literal motive or a reason for action. It's the spark plug in an engine. It provides the initial combustion needed to get the pistons moving.
So it's the internal why. It's that feeling of, I want to be able to travel the world and speak English fluently. That's a powerful image, and it definitely moves me. But what about consistency? That word sounds much more industrial.
It does. Consistency is about standing together or being firm. Think of it like this. Motivation is the initial push. It's the reason you buy the expensive running shoes and the fancy gym membership. Consistency, on the other hand, is the mechanical habit of putting those shoes on every morning at 6 a.m., even when it's raining, even when you have a headache, and even when you'd rather stay in bed.
I like that. So motivation is the why and consistency is the how. But the problem is that in the heat of the moment, the how feels so much heavier than the why. Why is there such a massive gap between wanting something and actually doing it?
It feels heavy because it requires effort without an immediate reward. We live in an age of instant gratification. Motivation gives you a hit of dopamine. You feel good just thinking about your goals. You imagine yourself standing on a stage giving a speech in English, and your brain gives you a little reward chemical. Consistency, however, doesn't always feel good in the moment. It's often repetitive, quiet, and, dare I say it, boring.
There it is, the B word, boredom. I think many of us quit things not because they are too hard, but because we get bored of the routine. We mistake that boredom for a sign that we've lost our passion. I've definitely done this. I'll start a new language course with so much energy, but by week 3, when I'm still practicing the same grammar rules, I think, maybe I'm just not cut out for this.
That is such a common trap. We've romanticized passion to the point where we think if we aren't excited every second, then something is wrong. But high achievers, the people who actually reach the top of their fields, aren't necessarily more passionate than the rest of us. They don't have a secret stash of motivation. They are just better at navigating the boredom of the middle.
The boredom of the middle. That's a great phrase. It's that long stretch after the excitement of starting has worn off, but before the results have actually shown up. It's like a desert you have to cross.
Exactly. Consistency is your canteen of water in that desert. Motivation is the beautiful oasis you're walking toward. If you only walk when you can see the oasis, you'll stop moving the moment you go over a sand dune and lose sight of it. Consistency is the compass that says, keep walking 5,000 steps a day, regardless of what you see on the horizon.
That makes total sense. So if I'm an English learner, motivation is wanting to watch movies without subtitles. Consistency is the 15 minutes of vocabulary practice I do every single night before I turn off the light, even if I'm exhausted.
Precisely. One is an emotion, the other is a system. Emotions are like the weather, they change constantly. Systems are like the climate. They are the long-term patterns that actually shape the landscape of your life.
I think I've been trying to build a house on the weather instead of the climate. No wonder my progress feels so unstable.
Well, don't worry, you're not alone. Most people spend their whole lives chasing the perfect weather of motivation. But let's talk about why we wait for those perfect conditions in the first place.
That metaphor about building on the weather is so relatable. It leads right into something I struggle with almost every morning, the myth of the perfect moment. I often find myself waiting for the stars to align before I start working. You know the feeling. The house has to be perfectly clean, the coffee needs to be at the exact right temperature, and I need to have had exactly 8 hours of sleep.
Oh, the Goldilocks approach to productivity. Everything has to be just right. If the chair is a bit too hard or the room is a bit too cold, suddenly it's impossible to focus. If we waited for those perfect conditions, we'd only actually work about 3 days a year. That's the core of the motivation trap. It tricks us into believing that peak performance requires peak emotions and a perfect environment.
It's so true. I'll look at my desk and think, I can't possibly study English vocabulary right now. There's a stack of mail I haven't sorted through. It's like my brain is looking for any excuse to avoid the friction of the actual task. We often call this procrastination, but it feels more like a search for readiness.
Exactly. But here's the cold, hard truth. Readiness is a feeling, not a fact. In fact, waiting for the perfect moment is often just a sophisticated way of hiding from the fear of failure. If you never start because the conditions weren't perfect, you never have to face the possibility that your work might not be perfect either.
Wow, that's a bit of a reality check. So by setting these impossibly high standards for when we start, we're actually protecting our egos?
Precisely. It's a defense mechanism. We tell ourselves, I would have done a great job, but I was just too tired today. It's much scarier to say, I sat down in perfect conditions, worked my hardest, and it still wasn't very good. But that's the risk you have to take to grow. To be consistent, you have to be willing to do B- work on days when you don't feel like an A+ student.
That shift in mindset, allowing ourselves to be mediocre, is actually quite difficult for people who want to excel. I find that when I'm learning English, if I don't feel sharp or articulate, I'd rather not speak at all. I don't want people to see me struggling.
And that's exactly where the perfect moment myth kills progress. If you only practice English on days when you feel confident, you'll never build the muscle memory required for the days when you're stressed. Consistency means practicing when you're clumsy, when you're searching for words, and when your grammar feels like a mess.
So how do we actually break out of this? How do we start when the environment is noisy, our energy is low, and we feel like doing absolutely nothing?
You have to lower the barrier to entry. We often fail because we visualize the entire mountain instead of just the first step. If you can't commit to an hour of intense English study, don't just give up. Commit to 5 minutes. The goal isn't the quality of the work on your worst day. The goal is simply not breaking the chain.
Don't break the chain. That reminds me of that famous productivity tip from Jerry Seinfeld. He said he just marked an X on a calendar for every day he wrote a joke. Eventually, the chain of X's became so long that he didn't want to stop, regardless of whether the jokes he wrote that day were actually funny.
That's it. It's about the momentum. Physics applies to our habits just as much as it applies to objects. An object in motion stays in motion. If you can just push through the first 2 minutes of not wanting to do it, the friction usually disappears. Consistency keeps the wheels turning so you don't have to use all your mental energy just to overcome the initial resistance every single day.
I think I need to start viewing my unperfect sessions as a badge of honor. Like, hey, I studied English today, even though I had a headache and the neighbor was using a power drill. That's actually a bigger win for consistency than a 2-hour session on a quiet Sunday.
It absolutely is. Those are the sessions that build character. Anyone can work when they're inspired. Only a consistent person works when they're distracted. But to really understand why our brains fights us so hard on this, we need to look at the actual psychology of habits are formed.
Let's get a bit more technical, because I think understanding the why helps us forgive ourselves when we struggle. From a psychological or even a biological perspective, why does our brain seem to crave motivation like a drug, but resist consistency like it's a chore?
It's actually a fascinating survival mechanism. You see, our brains are ancient hardware running modern software. From an evolutionary standpoint, your brain's primary job isn't to make you a polyglot or a successful CEO. Its job is to keep you alive and conserve energy. Evolutionarily speaking, why would you exert a massive amount of mental or physical effort if there isn't an immediate threat to your safety or a guaranteed big reward right in front of you?
So my brain is basically trying to save battery life by convincing me to stay on the couch.
Exactly. Effort is an expensive expenditure for the brain. Motivation mimics a high reward state. When you feel motivated, your brain is flooded with dopamine, the anticipation chemical. It makes you feel like the goal is already within reach, which feels amazing. Consistency, however, requires the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logical thinking and long-term planning, to override the basal ganglia, which is the part of the brain that loves patterns and autopilot behavior.
That sounds like an internal civil war. No wonder I feel exhausted just thinking about starting a new habit. It's like the logical me is fighting the lizard brain me.
It really is a battle of wills. And this is where the modern world makes it even harder. We are surrounded by what psychologists call passive action. This is when you watch a motivational video on YouTube or read a book about how to study English. Because you're consuming information related to your goal, your brain releases a bit of dopamine. It tricks you into thinking you've actually made progress, when in reality you haven't moved an inch.
Oh, I am definitely a victim of that. I'll spend 2 hours watching how to speak like a native videos, and by the end, I feel like I've accomplished something. But then if someone actually asks me a question in English, I realize I haven't practiced speaking at all. I've just been a spectator.
That is the productivity paradox. You feel busy, but you aren't being effective. We call that passive action versus active action. Active action is the uncomfortable part. It's the repetition. It's the actual doing. The problem is that active action doesn't give you that immediate dopamine hit. In fact, it often feels like a withdrawal because you're forcing your brain to work hard without a visible reward.
That's a tough pill to swallow. I'm definitely guilty of productive procrastination, spending hours researching the best apps for learning English instead of just opening one and learning 10 new words. It's like I'm preparing for a race that I never actually run.
We all do it because it's safer. But the real growth, the neurological change in your brain, happens in the repetition of the boring stuff. Think about muscle memory. If you want to learn to play the piano, you don't just watch videos of Mozart. You play the scales over and over until your fingers move without you thinking. Language is the same. It's a muscle that needs consistent, active tension to grow.
So consistency is essentially the process of moving a task from the high-energy prefrontal cortex into the autopilot basal ganglia. Once it's a habit, it doesn't require willpower anymore because it's just something you do, like brushing your teeth.
Spot on. You're trying to reach a state where not doing the habit feels weirder than doing it. But getting to that point takes time, usually much longer than the 21 days people always talk about. For complex habits like learning a language, it can take months of consistency before the brain finally says, okay, I guess this is just who we are now, and stops fighting you.
That makes me feel much better about the struggle. It's not that I'm lazy, it's just that my brain is still in the negotiation phase of the habit. But I suppose that's where the all or nothing mindset can really mess things up, right? If we miss one day, the brain thinks the negotiation is over.
Exactly. The brain is looking for any excuse to go back to the low energy state of doing nothing. That's why the all or nothing trap is so dangerous. Let's dive into that in the next part.
That transition from the negotiation phase to the autopilot phase is where I usually trip up. And honestly, the biggest hurdle for me is this all or nothing mindset. I'm a perfectionist by nature, and if I miss a single day of my routine, I feel like a total failure. It's like a house of cards. If one card falls, I feel like I might as well knock the whole thing over and give up for the rest of the week.
I think you just described the #1 reason why people fail to reach their long-term goals. In psychology, there's actually a term for this. It's called the what the hell effect.
The what the hell effect? That sounds exactly like my Friday nights when I've already broken my diet.
Precisely. It was originally coined by researchers studying dieting. The idea is that once you have a small slip-up, like eating one cookie when you weren't supposed to, you tell yourself, well, I've already ruined my diet, so what the hell? I might as well eat the whole box of cookies and an extra large pizza. You transform a minor setback into a total collapse.
That is painfully relatable. I do the exact same thing with English. If I plan to study for an hour but I get home late and only have 20 minutes, I think, well, 20 minutes isn't enough to do a proper session, so I'll just do nothing and watch TV instead. It's a very binary way of thinking. It's either 100% or 0%.
And that binary thinking is incredibly detrimental to consistency. It's a cognitive distortion. Think about it this way. If you were driving and you accidentally got a flat tire, would you get out of the car and slash the other 3 tires out of frustration?
Of course not. That would be insane. I'd just change the tire and keep going.
Exactly. But that's exactly what we do to our habits. A missed study session is just a flat tire. It's a minor inconvenience in a very long journey. But when we allow the all or nothing mindset to take over, we slash our own tires and sabotage our progress. We lose the momentum we worked so hard to build over a single mistake.
I think the root of the problem is guilt. We feel so much shame for being imperfect that we'd rather quit entirely than face our own flaws. For our listeners who are learning English, this often happens with speaking. They make one grammar mistake in a conversation, feel embarrassed, and then shut down for the rest of the day.
You're spot on. Shame is the enemy of consistency. To be consistent, you have to develop resilience. You have to learn to fail forward. A bad study session where you're tired and keep forgetting words is still infinitely more valuable than no session at all. In fact, showing up on your worst days is actually more important for your brain than showing up on your best days.
Why is that? That seems counterintuitive.
Because when you show up on a bad day, you're proving to your brain that the habit is non-negotiable. You're telling your basal ganglia, we do this regardless of how we feel. That's how you build true grit. If you only show up when you're 100% motivated, you're not building a habit, you're just enjoying a hobby.
If you only show up when you're motivated, you're not building a habit, you're just enjoying a hobby. That's going to stay with me. So what's the practical buffer we can use to stop the what the hell effect from taking over?
There's a rule I live by. Never miss twice. It's a simple, powerful guideline. Life happens. You might get sick, your boss might ask you to work late, or you might just be genuinely exhausted. Missing once is an accident, but missing twice is the start of a new negative habit.
I like that rule because it allows for human error. It accepts that perfection is impossible, but it keeps you on the rails. It says, okay, I missed my English listening practice yesterday, so today, even if I only do 5 minutes, I must do it to protect the chain.
Precisely. It shifts the focus from being perfect to recovering quickly. The most successful people aren't the ones who never fail. They are the ones who get back on track the fastest. They don't let a slip up turn into a slide.
This is making me realize that I need to lower my expectations for my bad days. Instead of trying to be a superhero every day, I should aim to be a C student on the days when I'm struggling. Just get the work done, even if it's mediocre.
Exactly. A mediocre session keeps the habit alive. An empty session kills it. And once that habit is alive and healthy, you can start focusing on higher level strategies, like moving away from goals and focusing on systems.
I've been reading a lot about systems lately. It seems like every productivity book and podcast is obsessed with this idea. Some people even go so far as to say that goals are for losers and systems are for winners. To be honest, that sounds a bit extreme, doesn't it? I mean, how can you achieve anything if you don't have a goal in mind?
It definitely sounds provocative, but there's a very logical reason behind it. It's not that goals are bad, it's just that they're often insufficient and sometimes even counterproductive. A goal is a binary destination, a specific point you might never reach. A system, however, is a repeatable process you follow every single day. One is about the where, and the other is about the how.
So, if I have a goal to become fluent in English, why would that be problematic? It seems like a perfectly noble and clear objective to me.
It is a great objective, but think about the psychological state you're in while you're chasing it. If your focus is purely on the goal of fluency, you are effectively in a constant state of pre-success failure. Until you reach that magical point of fluency, you feel like you haven't succeeded yet. Every day that you aren't fluent feels like a day you haven't reached your target.
That is a very depressing way to look at it, but you're right. It makes the journey feel like a long period of inadequacy. I'm always looking at how much I don't know yet.
Exactly. Now compare that to a system. Instead of focusing on becoming fluent, your system might be, I will engage with English content for 30 minutes every morning while I have my coffee. If you do those 30 minutes, you have succeeded for that day. You get a win every single morning. Your success is based on your actions, which you can control, rather than a vague outcome that might be months or years away.
I see the shift. It's about moving the finish line to something I can actually cross every day. It makes the success feel tangible and immediate. But doesn't that make me lose sight of the big picture? How do I know I'm actually moving in the right direction if I'm just focusing on my 30 minutes?
That's where the trajectory comes in. If you have a solid system, the results take care of themselves. If a professional basketball player focused only on the scoreboard during the game, they'd probably play poorly because they're not focused on the task at hand. Instead, they focus on their form, their footwork, and their defense, their system. If the system is good, the score will reflect that at the end of the game.
That's a great analogy. It reminds me of people who want to write a book. If they focus on writing a 400-page novel, they'll be overwhelmed and probably quit by page 10. But if their system is write 2 pages every day, the book eventually writes itself.
Precisely. In the context of English learning, your system should be designed around your lifestyle. If you're a busy professional, a system of 10 new vocabulary a day is much more sustainable than a goal of studying for 4 hours every Saturday.
I think I've been guilty of being outcome-oriented rather than process-oriented. I get so caught up in the dream of the result that I neglect the architecture of the routine. I focus on the what, but I don't build a sturdy how.
And the beauty of a system is that it's flexible. If your system isn't working, say you're too tired in the mornings, you don't change your goal, you just refine your system. Maybe you move your 30 minutes to your lunch break or your commute. You're tinkering with the machinery of your life to make it run more smoothly.
This actually takes a lot of the anxiety out of learning. It's no longer about whether I'm smart enough or talented enough to reach the goal. It's just about whether I can stick to the system today. It turns a mountain into a series of small, flat steps.
That's exactly it. Success is the compounding interest of your daily systems. Just like money in a bank, the small daily efforts don't look like much at first, but over time, the growth becomes exponential. But to keep those systems running, we have to address the why, and that brings us back to the role of motivation.
We've been quite hard on motivation today, haven't we? We've called it a flickering candle and a distraction from the real work of consistency. But I have to play devil's advocate for a second. Is there ever a time when motivation is actually useful? Or should we just throw it out the window entirely and become productivity robots?
No, definitely don't throw it out. Motivation is a beautiful, necessary thing. If consistency is the engine of the car, motivation is the ignition spark. You can have a perfectly tuned engine, but if you don't have that initial spark to start the combustion, you're just sitting in a very expensive piece of metal. You need that initial why to give your life a sense of direction and purpose.
So it's like a compass. It tells you which way to walk, but it won't walk the miles for you.
Exactly. I love that analogy. You use motivation for the big picture. You use it during your vision sessions, when you're sitting down and deciding, I want to become a researcher, or I want to start a YouTube channel to help others learn English. That's where motivation is the king. It provides the aspirations that fuel the systems we talked about earlier. Without motivation, consistency is just aimless, repetitive labor. It becomes a grind with no end in sight.
That makes sense. I suppose the danger isn't having motivation. The danger is relying on the compass to actually move your feet. I've noticed that when I'm feeling particularly inspired, maybe after watching a great documentary or reading a success story, I feel like I can take on the world. But that feeling is so evanescent. It disappears the moment I face a difficult technical problem or a boring task.
Evanescent. That's a great B2 level word. It means fading quickly, and that's exactly what high-intensity motivation does. It's a high-octane fuel that burns hot and fast. You should use those bursts of inspiration to set up your systems. If you're feeling super motivated on a Sunday night, don't just feel good. Use that energy to meal prep, schedule your study sessions, or clean your workspace. Use the high of motivation to make your low of consistency easier to manage.
That is a brilliant strategy. Use the peak energy to design the valley routine. So when the motivation inevitably fades on Tuesday morning, the plan is already in place and I don't have to think. I just follow the tracks I laid down when I was feeling inspired.
Precisely. You're essentially using your best self to help your lazy self. We also have to talk about refueling. Even the most disciplined person needs a reminder of why they are doing what they are doing. Sometimes watching a video or listening to a podcast like this one can be the refueling station you need to keep your system going. The key is to not become a motivation junkie, someone who just watches the videos but never does the work.
A motivation junkie. I think we've all been there. It's that feeling of being addicted to the high of a new idea without ever following through. So the balance is let motivation set the destination and provide the occasional recharge, but let consistency do the heavy lifting of the daily travel.
Spot on. It's a partnership. Motivation asks, what is the dream? Consistency asks, what is the next step? If you can get those two to work together, you become unstoppable. You have the heart of a dreamer and the hands of a worker.
As we wrap up this episode of Daily English Dialogues, let's get down to brass tacks. We've talked a lot about the philosophy of consistency, the internal civil war in our brains, and why motivation is a fickle friend. But for our listeners sitting at home, or maybe commuting to work right now, what are the actual tangible steps they can take today to stop relying on the spark and start building a system?
That's the most important question. Knowledge without action is just mental entertainment. If I had to give a top 3 list of strategies for building consistency, especially for something as complex as learning a language, the first would be the 2-minute rule. It's a concept popularized by James Clear, and it's a total game changer for people with an all-or-nothing mindset.
I've heard of this. It's the idea that you scale down any habit until it takes less than 2 minutes to perform, right?
Exactly. The logic is that the hardest part of any task is starting. Once you start, the friction usually evaporates. So instead of having a goal to study English for 1 hour, your goal becomes open my English textbook to page 1. Instead of running 5 kilometers, your goal is put on my running shoes and tie the laces.
That feels almost too easy. Like, does opening a book actually count as studying?
In the beginning, yes, because you aren't optimizing for results yet. You're optimizing for showing up. You're training your brain to follow through on its intentions. Once the habit of showing up is established, you can easily expand the time, but you can't improve a habit that doesn't exist. For a language learner, if you're exhausted, just watch 1 2-minute video in English. That's it. You kept the chain alive.
I love that. It makes the barrier to entry so low that it's actually harder to not do it than to do it. What's the second strategy?
The second is habit stacking. This is where you anchor a new habit to an existing one. We all have autopilot routines. We brush our teeth, we make coffee, we check our phones. To build consistency, you stack your new habit on top of an old one. For example, after I pour my morning coffee, I will learn 3 new English phrasal verbs.
Ah, so you're using the momentum of an established habit to carry the new one. I do this without even realizing it. I always listen to English podcasts while I'm doing the dishes. Doing the dishes is the anchor and the podcast is the stack. It makes a boring chore much more productive.
Exactly. You've built an infrastructure for your learning. And the third and perhaps most underrated strategy is environment design. We like to think we have willpower, but the truth is that we are products of our environment. If your phone is sitting next to you while you study, you will check it eventually. You're making consistency fight against temptation.
So instead of trying to be stronger than the temptation, we should just remove it.
Precisely. If you want to practice English more, put your English book on your pillow in the morning. If you want to stop scrolling on social media, put your phone in another room. Make the good habits have the least amount of friction, and make the bad habits have the most friction. You want to make it easy to do right and hard to do wrong.
That's such a powerful shift. It moves the responsibility from our mood to our surroundings. Before we close out, I want to touch on something very specific for our listeners on this channel. Many of them are at an upper intermediate level, and they feel like they've hit a plateau where they aren't seeing rapid progress anymore. How does consistency help with the plateau?
The plateau is where motivation goes to die. When you're a beginner, you learn so much so fast that the dopamine hits are constant. At the intermediate level, the gains are incremental and often invisible. This is where you have to trust the compounding effect. If you improve by just 1% every day through consistent practice, you will be 37 times better by the end of the year. You might not feel the change today or tomorrow, but the math doesn't lie.
37 times better. That's incredible when you think about it. It's the boring 15 minutes of daily practice that actually builds the genius over time.
Exactly. So to our listeners, don't wait for the feeling of readiness. Don't wait for the perfect moment where the world is quiet and you feel like a scholar. Open your book, listen to your podcast, or speak 1 sentence out loud right now. Win the first 2 minutes.
That is the perfect note to end on. Thank you so much for this deep dive. I feel a lot less guilty about my uninspired mornings now, and I hope our audience feels the same.
It was a pleasure. Remember, everyone, motivation gets you to the starting line, but consistency gets you to the finish line.
Thank you for tuning in to Daily English Dialogues. If you found this conversation helpful, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear about your 2-minute habit or your habit stack. Until next time, keep practicing, keep showing up, and keep being consistent.
Goodbye, everyone. Happy learning.